Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Revolution 250 podcast. I am Bob Allison, professor of history at Suffolk University, also chair Rev 250's advisory group. We are a consortium of about 75 organizations in Massachusetts planning commemorations of American independence. And our guest today is Alan Foulds. And Alan Foulds wears many hats. He's has been the moderator. Are you still the Reading Town moderator?
I am, yes, 29 years. Yeah.
Wow. But he is also here with us today as the member of the Linfield Historical Society and helping head up that group's Revolution 250 plans and author of many books, but we'll focus today on Linfield. Actually, you did write a history of Linfield, Linfield 2 centuries. So I guess you are the historian of Linfield.
Well, one of a few, yes.
Good. And so Linfield is doing some exciting things to commemorate its role, the people of what then was Linfield's role in the American Revolution. So you have some stuff happening actually on Patriots Day weekend.
We do, yeah. Just to explain, I know I talked to Jonathan earlier. Lynn End was what Linfield was called back in 1775. It was actually part of the town of Lynn at the time. It was the second precinct or parish, but it really was almost an independent place from the start. It built a meeting house in 1714. So there's a lot of local heritage. And with its own militia company, there's a lot of history there.
Yeah. About how many people lived there at the time of the Revolution?
We have been told probably 100 years ago, an historian said there were roughly 25 houses at the time. But there were 38 people in the militia company, so I guess there were a lot of people in each household.
Yeah. Okay, so they have a militia company, and then what are they up to in early 1776?
Well,
1775, I guess.
Right. Actually, if you even go back a little bit farther, they started having the regular moderator for Lynn's town meeting happened to come from Linfield, so he had a lot of sway. Okay. And in the town meetings, they began back in as early as 1768 making motions supporting Boston when the port was closed or when the quartering act went in. So they were doing a lot. And then locally in Linfield, they were having village meetings as well in support of the cause. I think it was very a patriot town at the time, Patriot Village.
Yeah. So was Lynn also what then was the main part of Lynn? Was that also a patriot place?
Yes. The town of Lynn at the time was made up of Lynn, Saugus, Swampscott and Hart, and Linfield. And the downtown Lynn area, which is today still Lynn, had two militia companies, plus the Minute Company was based there as well. And then Saugus had its own company and Linfield had its own company. So, like I said, the town of Lynn had 2 plus the Minute Company. Wow. So I think they were pretty patriot-sided as well. Yeah.
And then Saugus and Hart also had militia companies. And
Hart did not. I don't think anybody really lived out there at the time, at least not many. But Saugus did. Saugus actually was called the first company of Lynn. And they were actually much larger than Linfield's. Linfield was the smallest of the 5 in
Interesting. Yeah. So, these guys, they had a militia company, and then what did they do on April 19th?
They were right there in the thick of it. To back up a little bit, they were also involved up in Leslie's Retreat in February. Okay. They didn't, I say they were involved. They marched, and when they got there, everything was over. So they just turned around and went home. But they did lose a guy. There was actually Joseph Newhall got violently ill and then died. Wow. The local company always called him the first casualty of the war. But it was actually.
Do we know why he was ill?
They said he caught a cold. I'm suspecting it was probably pneumonia or something.
Yeah, it's February, and they're marching around up to Salem. Yeah.
But then on April 18th or 18th and 19th, they were heavily involved. One of the local heroes is named Martin Herrick. He actually lived in what is today North Reading at the time, but right on the Winfield North Reading line. He was the one who had ridden up. He met Paul Revere in Medford. When Paul Revere came through, he stopped at Captain Isaac Hall's house, the captain of the Medford militia. He lived right next door to Simon Tufts, who was a teaching doctor. Martin Herrick was there as a student of Simon Tufts.
Oh, wow.
He and another guy named John Sprague were both there at the time. Sprague presumably went up to Malden, and then Herrick headed off to Reading and then to Lynn End. And so they were ready for it. They knew something was happening because.
Okay, so just back up, Alan. So Revere stops at this house in Medford,
right?
Because he knows why. Why does he stop there?
Well, he apparently knew the captain because in his own one of his 3 accounts, he mentioned stopping at the Medford captain's house.
Okay.
Then he said, "I alarmed every house after that from here to Lexington." So he must have known Hall personally, or at least knew where he was.
Right. Yeah.
And then Tufts was right next door.
Okay.
And then Herrick rode north. We're guessing he went from there to Stoneham because the Stoneham captain, Samuel Sprague, was only about a quarter of a mile north of Tufts. And it was the direct route to Reading and Linfield. And all Samuel Sprague says is a rider came up from Medford, knocked on my door. So we're assuming it's him.
Yeah.
And then go ahead.
So again, one of the great myths we have is Paul Revere riding along yelling, but actually we know he actually knows where he is going and he knows whose houses to where to wake up someone who's then going to get this word out.
Exactly. In fact, even to go back further, obviously it was more complicated or more sophisticated than we think, because even back on Leslie's retreat, the Lynn End group got word to march to Salem. And we don't know anything about who came then. Yeah. At least we never found it yet. So, but obviously the word was going out into the countryside. In fact, they met the Reading group on their way back and told them it's too late, go home.
Wow.
So Reading had heard about it as well.
Yeah, a little later. Yeah.
I
mean, I don't want us to keep backing up, but Linfield also had its own version of a tea party.
That's right. It was actually in Lynn, but it was, like I said, Linfield was very much involved in it. It was a few days after the Boston Tea Party. In fact, again, to back up, on the night of December 16th, the actual Tea Party, the Lynn Town meeting met to discuss this whole thing and voted that they were opposed to the landing of any tea, and not realizing that the Sons of Liberty were kind of busy at that same moment. But 4 or 5 days later, the women of Lynn marched into the bake shop of James Bowler. He was also a tea vendor. And they demanded that he stop selling any of the tea that was imported. Wow. And he refused. So these women just went in, stormed the place, ripped all the tea off the shelves, went out in the street and dumped it into the street.
Wow.
They didn't touch anything else, just the tea.
So does anything happen, or are there any repercussions for these women or for Mr. Bowler?
Nope. That's why I suspect that it was a very patriot side of town, because everybody thought it was great.
Wow. Does he stay in town then?
He sort of disappears from history after that. I suspect he may not have been around much longer.
That's interesting. So we're talking with Alan Foulds, historian and a member of the Linfield Historical Society, which is planning events to commemorate the role of Linfield in the events of the Revolution. And so you have then the militia, Martin Herrick's arrived with his message. And so then what happens with the militia?
Well, Martin Herrick rode up to Gowing's Tavern, which was sort of the heart and soul of the village. It's where everybody congregated, and it was the official meeting place of the militia. In fact, Gowing was initially elected as captain when they formed the company back in November, but almost immediately relinquished it to Nathaniel Bancroft, who was kind of a statesman in town. He had been involved in everything. And Gowing stepped back to be first lieutenant. But Gowing's Tavern was still the meeting place. So they met there. Benjamin Adams, a 16-year-old, the youngest member of the company, was already there ready to beat the drums. And according to legend, he beat it so loud it could be heard a mile away.
Wow.
We do know that when it was heard, they fired shots and so forth to pass the alarm on. We know that a guy named Daniel Townsend, who lived just about a mile away, headed down there. There was his next door neighbor, blanking on his name. It'll come to me in a second. Oh, Thomas Hadley, also headed down, and those two would not return. They both were killed that day. And then there was a house. This is a little bit of a mystery. A house, maybe a quarter of a mile from there, Wellman House. 10 people from that house marched down to the center of town, We
Wow.
don't know if they were there waiting or whether they were all related.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Well,
Then there was a
interesting.
guy. Then there was a
Do
guy.
any of these houses still stand, Alan?
No, Daniel Townsend's house burned in 1880 sometime.
Mm-hmm.
And then Gowing's Tavern burned in 1896.
Mm.
Hadley's house was torn down sometime in the 1860s. And another house was built on the site, which is still there. The meeting, in Captain Bancroft's house, unfortunately, we just lost in December. It was there until this past December. It was in pretty rough shape.
Yeah.
And then, but the meeting house, the 1714 meeting house is still there.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So the legend is they all met at Gowing's Tavern, and then they marched about an eighth of a mile to the meeting house where the gunpowder was stored. Okay.
Interesting that they're storing the gunpowder in the meeting house.
Right. Now, whether that's true or not, nobody really knows, but that's the legend that has come down.
But I have heard of that would be a place, because that's the last place anyone would look.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
So, yeah. So, okay, so then they march off, but where are they heading to?
They headed into what is today Wakefield. It was part of Reading at the time, South Reading. And then from there down through what is now Melrose. And then in Malden, they met up with the other 4 Lynn companies, the Saugus and the 3 Lynn companies, and a Danvers company. And I think Danvers had a few companies, but they all kind of congregated there and were given instructions. That's all we know. Who gave them the instructions, we don't know. But we were given instructions that they should go to Menotomy, the town of Arlington, where they would meet the British troops on the way back to Boston.
Interesting.
So when they got there, as they were marching in, Captain Bancroft said to one of his privates, by the way, Bancroft, although he'd been a colonel or something in the King's regiments, had never seen combat. He turned to one of his privates, a guy named Zerubbabel Hart, who had been in the French Navy Wards, and said, "Are you afraid of going into battle?" And his answer was, "No, but watch for the flankers." Unfortunately, that warning came a little too late. Bancroft looked up, and the main line was coming down the road, and the flankers were surrounding them. They were at about the Jason Russell house at the time. And the Danvers group hid behind some shingles that they piled up to use as a protection. The Bancroft's company, by the way, it was officially Lynn's 5th company, but every record refers to it as Bancroft's company, including the state records when they're paying the guy. But that Bancroft's company kind of dispersed throughout the area, hiding in different places or hiding behind rocks or the house. 2 of the members, Daniel Townsend and a guy named Timothy Monroe, suddenly realized they were surrounded. They were at the back of the house. They ran into the Jason Russell house, tried to go downstairs, but the door was bolted. There were other militiamen down there. And the bullets were pouring in the back window. The glass was flying everywhere. They thought they were trapped. So they both jumped out a side window. Townsend was killed instantly. Monroe somehow survived. He, depending on what era he was telling you, his clothes had 12 bullet holes or 22 bullet holes. But he did get away, and he lived to a ripe old age, actually.
Wow. And he goes back to Linfield then.
Right. Well, actually, they followed the troops to Boston. Then came back. There's actually a story that he comforted a mortally wounded British soldier on the way back. It was just a guy laying there and asked for help. So he tried to stem the flow of the blood, but to no avail. But again, according to legend, the British soldier gave him a belt buckle, and that's passed down through the family. And unfortunately, we don't know where it is today.
Wow. That's interesting.
But then they did go back to Linfield.
But then does this 5th company or Bancroft's company serve subsequently in the war?
They never marched or fought together again. They were formed in November of 74. They went to Salem in February of 75, and they marched in April, and that was it. They pretty much went their separate ways. Some of them joined up with Colonel Pickering's regiment out of Salem. A couple of them joined up other companies. Some of the older ones particularly, just went back to their lives. In fact, Bancroft himself never saw any more action. That was the only day he was involved in the war.
Wow, interesting. So that was his one bit of military experience.
Right. Well, he was in the military for years before that, or in the militia, I should say.
Right, yeah, but he never actually.
As far as battling, as far as combat goes, it was just that one day.
Wow, interesting. Now you've been working on a play. It'll
Yes,
be telling a lot of the story. Shadows of 1775. Can you tell us a bit about that project?
I can, yeah. A lot of it came from actual documentation, state records, or history books.
Yeah.
Howard Kendall Sanderson wrote a great book back around 1907, I think it was, called Lynn and the Revolution. And he did amazing amount of research. And then there's Alonzo Lewis's Hearts and Homes of Old Lynn, Wellman's History of Linfield, and a couple of minor places too. Not minor, but smaller parts of Linfield story, Essex County and the Revolution.
Right.
So we've pieced these together, knowing that many of them are facts, some are legends, but these are the stories that come down. So we created this play, and the idea of the play is, without being overt about it, they're effectively ghosts coming back to tell us their stories.
Okay.
Most of them are buried right across from where we're having the play, and they are coming in and they're telling a modern audience each of their individual stories, which we're hoping will tell the entire story.
Interesting. And it's being done then in the place where these actual living people would have been back in 1775.
Well, almost. Originally, we were going to do it in the old meeting house.
Okay.
Which is right on the common, and it was there then. It's the only building really. Well, it's a couple of houses, but it's the only public building that still survives.
Okay.
But as a practical matter, we have moved it just across the street into the chapel of the Center Congregational Church, which is the successor church to the meeting house.
Yeah.
And that building it's not quite 1775. It was built in 1836, but it's just set up for a play a little bit better.
Interesting.
So it's almost in the right place.
Yes. So when will this be done, the play?
Okay, the play will be staged April 18th, and it takes place on April 18th. In fact, it's April 18th, 2025, and April 18th, 1775. It's they're telling the stories of what happened that night, and of course into the next day. And there's 12 people. Well, one narrator. We have a poem reader. We have a poem about Martin Herrick that one person is going to read. And then we have 10 villagers, real people from that era. 5 of them are militia members. One is the wife of a militia member who had a very sad story. Her husband was killed. And then she just 6 months later, she died of a broken heart, leaving her 5 kids.
Wow.
The minister of the church is part of the story. In fact, the current minister of the church is playing that role.
Perfect. Great. And you're also doing a reenactment of Martin Herrick's ride.
Right. It's cut down a little bit from what we had hoped. But so instead of coming up from Medford, what we'd hoped, he is going to be coming from around the corner.
Okay.
But yes, he's coming in. This will actually be the third time that Martin Herrick's ride has been reconstructed. It happened back in 1961 when a plaque was put out for Daniel Townsend, who was killed.
Yeah.
In 1975, it was done again. So we thought we'd repeat it. So it's almost like a recreation of 1975 as well as 1775.
Okay. Very good. And then you're going to have the common decorated too with the history.
Right. We haven't come up with a good name for it yet, but we're tentatively calling it the Biography Gallery. We're putting lawn signs up, telling the stories of all 38 who marched that day, plus the minister, plus Martin Herrick, and a couple of other people who were involved at the time. It's funny, one of the people on the committee said, we were trying to come up with a name for it. She said, how about calling it Meet the Patriots? And we thought we might be inundated with football fans. So we haven't come up with a name, but they're going to be all over the common. As I said, Martin Herrick is riding in. We've got some music. We've got a fiddler. We've got a patriotic concert that's going to end the whole program.
Very good.
And we have a militia. It's going to be a very small reenactment of them marching off toward Manhattan.
Oh, good. Very good. Good. Now, it's a very important thing to do because we focus on Lexington and Concord, but we don't actually, the troops were coming from all over Massachusetts and then Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire. And this is an uprising. And most of the guys at Lexington and Concord, and even at Menotomy, were not from Lexington, Concord, Menotomy, but they're coming from other places.
That's right. That's right. In fact, at the Battle of Menotomy, in addition to Linfield and the other parts of Lynn, Danvers was a strong presence. I believe they lost either 7 or 8 men there.
Yeah, yeah.
Linfield lost 3, actually. Daniel Townsend gets all the publicity because his body was brought back and he had a big family.
Oh, yeah.
Poor Thomas Hadley, there was nobody here. Both of his children had died young. His wife had died fairly, not too early, not too much before the battle. And then his body never came back. It's still in Arlington today. So he was kind of forgotten. But Linfield had 3 people, and it was out of 25 houses. That's a
lot. Yeah. Now, are there graves marked in Linfield?
Well, Daniel Townsend's grave is there, as well as his wife Zeviah. They're there. And Thomas Hadley and William Flint, the other 2 from Linfield, are in the cemetery in Arlington. And there is a monument there, not just to them, but to all of the people who were killed there.
Yeah. What about Joseph Newhall? I mean, I feel kind of badly for him dying.
I do too. I know. He is buried in the South Burial Ground, which is another old 1700s burial ground in town. And Newhall was a big name in South Linfield. And I think I found his grave, but there's about 6 Joseph Newhalls in there. So he's probably one of them. But I know, unfortunately, we don't know much about him except he was part of that family.
Now, what got you interested in doing all this deep dive into both Linfield's history, but also 1775 in Linfield?
Well, I've always been a local history nerd. I mean, I just love things that I can go and see the locations of.
Right.
A lot. I grew up in Linfield. I've been living in Reading now for 44 years, but I grew up in Linfield. Both parents were heavily involved in the Historical Society. My father was the longest serving president.
Wow.
Back in 1975, I got involved in the bicentennial, and I learned so much at that time. I didn't know this stuff happened in my own town. I knew Lexington and Concord, but here's my own town. I can walk down to where this all took place. So I thought this time around, we need the whole new audience don't know this. We need to kind of educate them. I don't want to put it that way, but there's people that just don't realize in their own town, just like I didn't, that so much happened right here.
Right. That's right. It's a great thing. So we're talking with Alan Foulds from the Linfield Historical Society, also the town moderator in the neighboring town of Reading, and historian. You've covered a lot of things. I mean, he's written about baseball parks and other things. So you have lots of great history that you have done. And this is, you also have a podcast. It's also history, Tales from Alan's Archives, because you've been at this for a long time. It's an extraordinary amount of work you've done to recover this history. So, how is this? Are you getting involved with the schools in Linfield and other ways of reaching these audiences?
We are trying to get involved with the schools. Unfortunately, because we want to have it on the exact day, it's smack in the middle of school vacation. So we've lost a little bit of momentum there, but not completely. Not everybody goes away. So
that's true.
We've been working, trying to get schools involved, and we do have a youth component of this, a little bit younger. The library, which is right there on the common, is hosting a children's event that morning. 3-cornered hat making, storytelling. Somebody's going to be reciting Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, and that'll all feed into the events on the common at the end of that event. So we do have a younger group coming in. Yeah.
Now, did you say there was a poem about Martin Herrick, or was I mishearing that?
No, there's also a poem about Martin Herrick. Yeah,
okay.
It was not by Longfellow. It was by a guy named Alan Foulds. But written 50 years ago, believe it or not.
Wow.
So that will be part of the play.
Oh, good. You don't want to recite it for us, do you?
Well, if I could try, but listen, my children, and you shall hear a tale of that fateful night. On the 18th of April in 75, the Redcoats wanted a fight. Our hero, Martin Herrick, his studies nearly done, as word came down to Medford town, the crisis had begun. Ride, Martin, ride, you've got to warn the countryside. Our differences with England have grown far too wide. It's hard to believe, young Herrick said, they finally lit the fuse. Duty calls, I must ride home to Reading with the news. My commander must be told, he thought, as he put away his books. With lightened load and familiar road, he raced to Captain Brooks. Ride, Martin, ride, you've got to tell our side. Before this thing is over, our bonds will be untied. As Herrick rode into his hometown, his journey nearly through, the neighbors who'd responded had numbered quite a few. But upon arriving, he was told that Dr. Brooks was out attending patient Hartshorn, a story some folks doubt. But Herrick found his captain who sent riders east and west. Who did he send to warn Lynn End? Brooks sent out his best. Ride, Martin, ride, Martin, ride. You've got to warn the countryside. Martin, ride. Now, I should explain a little bit the story. When John Brooks, who actually got fairly well known later, he became governor of Massachusetts. He was from Medford, but he was also a student of Dr. Tufts.
Okay.
Graduated.
That's why you call him Dr. Brooks.
Right. Yeah. He had graduated just before the battle and had moved to Reading to become the town doctor. Mm-hmm. And he also was immediately elected captain of the Minute Company in Reading. Mm-hmm. And he had been with Joseph Warren on the 17th, or the 16th or 17th. We're not exactly sure, but he was in Boston and knew a lot of things that were going on. So when Herrick went to his boarding house on John Street, by the way, that house still exists today where Brooks was rooming, he was told that he was out with a patient, a guy named Hartshorn. Well, Herrick really didn't believe that's what he was doing. He felt like he was probably planning stuff because Hartshorn was a member of the local committee of safety.
Okay.
So he found him, and that house still exists, and it's not very far from downtown Linfield. Mm-hmm. So from there, he rode to Linfield, and then eventually went back to meet his own company up in the north part of Reading, North Reading.
Wow, interesting. Now, does Merrick, he's studying to be a doctor. Does he become a doctor?
Oh, yes, yeah. After the war, I should say during the war, he was a naval surgeon.
Oh, wow.
And was captured twice.
Wow. And
after the war, he moved to Linfield. He didn't move back to Reading and became the country doctor. He was also a school teacher for a while in town.
Okay.
He married Sally Wright of Middleton. They raised 2 daughters. Mm-hmm. And then 1820, at his own request, he was the last person ever buried in the old burial ground.
Wow. Interesting. So he has a long life after this as a country doctor. But again, being captured twice by the British is no small feat.
No, I know. There's a note in one of the old history books saying that when Martin Herrick died, a lot of the townspeople thought they'd never survive another illness now.
So we're talking with Alan Foulds, historian, town moderator, poet, and history impresario, about what was happening in Linfield at the time of the Revolution. This is fascinating work. So I know the Linfield Historical Society, you've created a YouTube channel, other ways of getting these stories out. Can you tell us a bit more about that? That process?
Yeah, our Facebook page is pretty robust. As you just mentioned, we've been creating videos, little 3 or 4 minute stories on each of these subjects. Yeah. We had 2 last year when we were getting ready for the vigil, the 249th. This year, we've got 7 of them planned. 2 of them are up, and another one will go up in a couple of weeks. And then we'll have 2 in March and another couple in April. They're just telling smaller stories. One is the story of Martin Herrick. One is the story of marching off to Menotomy. Another one is all of the town meeting votes that took place before all of this and how involved they were even before there was even a thought of the war. In addition to that, we're trying to reach out and find descendants. We've got a list of all of the people that we know that marched that day. Although I have to admit, it's a little bit of a moving target. Yeah, we've always used the number 38. It's somewhere between 37 and 40.
Okay.
But we have a list of these people, and we're calling out, are you related to these people? And we've come across, I'd say 7 or 8 descendants already.
Interesting.
A whole family of Townsends that are related to Daniel Townsend, who was killed, have been involved. They were actually involved in the vigil last year.
Okay.
And will be involved again this year. Wellman is another big name in town. We found In fact, we kind of matched up two Wellmans, one that lives in Maine and one lives in Connecticut.
Wow, interesting.
They were right into our page, and now they're talking to figure out how they're related, because they both know they're related back to Linfield.
No.
And what else are we doing?
Well, Herrick had daughters. Have you tracked any descendants? Because that's a little more difficult.
We have not, again, because of the last name, it's a little tough.
Yeah.
We have not been able to find any descendants there. We've worked down a ways from the daughters, but then we just sort of lose it.
Okay.
But that would be great if we could come across that.
Yeah. And you must have the original muster roll. Is that where you're working from, or do you have, or is there one? Okay.
We do have, well, we have the muster roll from the state. It's actually the payroll.
Right.
Who was paid for what. It's interesting. Some things are kind of a mystery. One poor guy was only paid for half the distance that the others were. So we don't know if he didn't make it the whole way or what. Another guy was paid double distance because he was sent to Ipswich after the battle to bring prisoners up to the Ipswich jail. So prisoners were taken. He was James Bancroft. He was a relation to the captain. I think he was nephew. He wasn't the only one. There were several that were assigned to bring these prisoners up north. And so
that's an interesting story. I mean, what happens to the guys who get captured then? Because it's not like they have any system for holding them. So these guys went to the jail in Ipswich. They
went to the jail in Ipswich. And I don't know what happens after that to them, whether they being part of an exchange or they just spent the whole time there. An interesting side story is in Reading, my other town. We had a very well-known prisoner here, Archibald Campbell. He was leading a transport that came into Boston a few days after the evacuation. And of course,
these Scots showed up not knowing that the British had evacuated.
So Archibald Campbell was assigned to be held at the Parker Tavern in Reading, which is another still existing house. And he was there for a few months, and then he was moved to the Concord jail. Apparently, he liked living in Reading because the way it was worded is he couldn't go more than half a mile from the tavern. So in other words, he had pretty much free reign. And they had picnics up in this place that's now called Scotland Hill. Then he was moved to Concord, and things were more serious. And he actually wrote to Washington, General Washington, to say, "Can you do anything for me?"
Wow. Yes. Yeah, I think being held in a tavern might not have been bad for a lot of guys. I think.
No.
Especially if you can only go half a mile away.
Right, half a mile away, and he got to keep a couple of his servants too.
Wow, interesting. And so we've been talking with Alan Foulds, who is one of the driving forces in Linfield Historical Society's plans for April 18th, April 19th. They will be putting on a play, Shadows of 1775, with some of the colonial residents who will be telling their stories of what happened. And we'll be reenacting Martin Herrick's ride and the March to Menotomy and the all kinds of things happening thanks to what you guys in Linfield are doing to commemorate April 19th, actually commemorate Patriots Day. And then, as you said, there are a lot of stories that happen afterwards. So you must have plans.
Yeah, we, well, just to keep the celebration going, it's not exactly the same story, but we're holding an event called If This House Could Talk. A few towns have done it. In fact, in Reading, we did it. What we're asking people to do is come up with a story of their house. It doesn't have to be that George Washington slept here or Paul Revere came. It's anything that has some interest. Maybe it used to be a factory, or maybe it was the old train station, whatever. And just tell stories. And you're not inviting people into your house. You're just inviting them to your front lawn where you put this sign. And we're picking a couple of weekends in probably September. And we'll advertise this. We'll have a website with all of with a map, and eventually we'll put a book together with those stories.
Terrific. Anything else we should talk about, Alan, before we let you go?
I think that probably wraps it up. Everything is free and open to the public. We're hoping that we get people from Linfield or in wherever they want to come to hear one of these side stories of the Revolution.
Oh, yeah. This is tremendous. And I think as the more we explore this, we realize these side stories really are the revolution. It's these ordinary folks making these choices. So thank you so much for leading this charge. We've been talking with Alan Foulds, Linfield Historical Society, as well as the Reading town moderator, prolific historian. Your books include Boston's Ballparks and Arenas, as well as Linfield, 2 Centuries, and many others. Looks like you're about to say something else, Alan.
Oh, no.
Okay, good. And so thank you so much for joining us. And I want to thank Jonathan Lane, our producer, as well as our many listeners around the country and around the world. And every week we thank folks who are regularly tuning in. If you're in one of these places and want to connect with Rev 250, send Jonathan Lane an email, jlane@revolution250.org. Or if you just want to connect, jlane@revolution250.org. That's Revolution 250. We love hearing from folks. And this week I want to thank our listeners in Charleston, South Carolina, and Edinburgh, and Uncasville, Connecticut, Towson, Maryland, Frankfurt in Germany, Amman, Jordan, the lovely island of Malta, and here in the Commonwealth, Andover, Acton, Springfield, all places between and beyond. Thanks for joining us. And now we will be piped out on the road to Boston.